morning. Thanks so much for watching this Sunday's message. It's Sunday, April 26th, the last Sunday of April. Maybe you've heard it said that April is the cruelest month. It's actually the first line of T.S. Eliot's epic poem, The Wasteland. People wonder why he thought April was so cruel. I might spend some time reflecting on that in a future message. But certainly I'm sure we're all glad to see this April come to an end. It's been a hard month, and we continue to deal with a lot of changes and restrictions, but I want to share a word of hope and encouragement with you today on this last Sunday of April. I'd like us to anchor our reflections on a few verses from Hebrews chapter 12. It's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. And the writer of the book of Hebrews, we're not sure who that was, but he was writing to people who were hurting, who are really struggling in their faith and in so many other ways. And so he wanted to give them this letter that would encourage them. And in fact, in these words recorded in Hebrews 12, verses 5 and 6, he even says to them that they have forgotten the word of encouragement recorded in Scripture, and he has to remind them of that. And so here we find those words. He's actually quoting from the Old Testament book of Proverbs, and in Hebrews 12, verses 5 and 6, he writes the following: "My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and punishes each one he accepts as his child." Now, at first, those words might not sound very encouraging at all, because they seem to suggest that the hardships that we go through are signs of God's correction or even punishment. It might even cause some people to feel confused. Is God really the cause of my suffering? Is he sending it to punish me? We need to be very careful about this, because there are many people who, especially in times of catastrophe or some significant example of suffering, are quick to point out how God is at work in that to punish wicked people. And sometimes it's even suggested what kind of people specifically God has in mind to punish. Perhaps you remember me mentioning this in previous messages. The world is a broken, fallen world. We know that. We're living it right now. But that's not because God wants it this way. God created a perfect world. And so this pandemic that we continue to deal with is not something that God created or is sending because he wants to judge or punish or correct. It doesn't originate in the mind or will of God. The good world that God created has been invaded by enemy forces, and it's really the will of the evil one that is behind all of the suffering that we see throughout human history and still in the world today. And so we need to be very careful when we are trying to discern what we think might be God's purposes in human suffering. It's clear that he does have a purpose, but we're not always able to understand what those purposes are. I think of Joni Eareckson Tada, who herself experienced a great deal of suffering in her life. You've probably heard the story of how a young athletic woman decades ago, by means of a diving accident, broke her spine, broke her neck, and has been paralyzed for decades since then. But she's a radiant Christian who, like so many of us, struggles with God's will and trying to understand that, but is a woman of strong faith and encouragement. Here's one of the things that she writes, specifically on this topic of God and suffering. "God takes no joy in human agony. True, God allows suffering, but he doesn't do the suffering. He's not the one wielding the club. These are deep waters," she admits. "Welcome to the world of finite humans trying to comprehend an infinite God. What's clear is that God permits all sorts of things he doesn't approve of." And then she makes it very personal with these words: "Do your circumstances seem to be careening out of control? Remember that God is with you through it, loving you and caring for you." I think those are great words that help us remember how God is not the cause of our suffering, but is in it and using it for our benefit in some way. And that's exactly what the writer of the book of Hebrews is wanting to send to these Christians that he's writing to encourage them, to give them some hope. He wants them to know that God, as their Father, is disciplining them, is using their suffering to make them better people and stronger Christians. And so it's something that makes us think about how adversity, despite all of its difficulties, has a positive influence as well. It's been a well-attested fact. We hear athletes speak of this when they refer to all of their hard training that helped them accomplish a victory, how they've worked through pain and even injury. They probably wouldn't have accomplished what they did without all of that hard work and suffering. And it reminds us of the other saying that we've probably heard and said from time to time, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That emphasizes both the negative power of suffering, but also the positive impact that it can have on our lives. This time of year, at least where we live here in Ontario, people are preparing to have flower and vegetable gardens outside. It's not warm enough yet to plant flowers and vegetables. There are still nights that freeze, and we need to wait at least another month until we can safely plant at least some flowers and vegetables outside. So what a lot of gardeners do in the meantime is grow little plants indoors, maybe in little greenhouses or something that they've constructed, or even potting little plants by a window so that they can be warmed by the light that shines in. As the days get a little warmer, and in order to prepare these young plants for being outside, gardeners will take them outside on a warm, bright day just for a little while, and they'll lengthen the amount of time that they bring them outside just to introduce them to being outside, to the fullness of the sun's light, to the wind and the cold. And so what they're doing is called hardening the plants. That's a very good word, hardening them. Imagine a little tomato plant growing inside for a few weeks, being brought outside for the first time. Imagine if they had the capacity to speak and share thoughts with us. Someone brings them out to a patio and they immediately would say, wait, what are you doing? I mean, I like it inside. It's nice and warm. There's no wind. It's perfect. Why are you bringing me out here? Well, they're doing it, the gardeners are, because they're preparing them. They're strengthening them. The gardener doesn't want to harm or kill the plants. It's the opposite. They want to strengthen them so that when they are planted outside, they'll survive. Now, that's exactly what suffering does in our lives. It hardens us. It prepares us. It strengthens us. And the writer of these words wants people who are feeling so discouraged, as many of us are now, to remember that while God doesn't cause the suffering, He's in it. He's using it as a means of disciplining us. That means He wants it to have a positive effect in our lives. And so we need to remember, as these people who first heard and read these words from the writer of Hebrews, that God is in our struggles. He is using them. And in fact, the very first words of that quote from the book of Proverbs is relational. My child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline. Don't give up when He corrects you. So there's an image of a father and a child there that's very intimate, very caring. Now it's interesting that there are two extremes that are identified in that passage that ought to be avoided whenever people find themselves in times of difficulty. Don't make light of it, and don't give up. Now those, I think, are very common ways that people handle suffering. We either make light of it, or we just collapse under the weight of it. We're seeing both of these extremes in the way people are handling this pandemic right now. People are either making light of it, or they're collapsing under it. So you hear people say things like, we've got this, we've been through tougher times than this before, we're going to come out of this even stronger than we were previously. I don't know why the world is making such a big deal of this. It's the media that is really trying to scare people more than anything. It's time that things open up and get back to the way they were again. what are they doing? They're making light of it. They're not recognizing the weight of the suffering that this world is having to deal with at this time. And then you hear the opposite extreme, represented by people who think the world's coming to an end. You know, they've lost all hope and confidence. They just collapse. They give up. Life will never be the way it once was. So those are the two extremes. You make light of the suffering or you give up. And most of us probably fall somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. We'll lean more towards one direction than the other, depending on what kind of a day we're having. But there's another option. And the word of encouragement that the writer of the book of Hebrews quotes here from the Old Testament book of Proverbs is a better option that helps us avoid both of those two extremes. Don't ignore and don't surrender. In other words, don't focus too much either on your own strength, that's making light of it, or on your own weakness, that's collapsing under it. What's the better way? Look to God. Trust His strength. Trust His presence. Trust His active and gracious work in and through your trouble to accomplish something good. Try to see what He's doing in all of this, is what He's telling them and us. Remember, He's your Father. You're His child. You're not left alone to fend for yourself in this world full of trouble and figure out all of these issues on your own. He's using this to make you stronger, even this, to make you a better person and a stronger Christian. It's why I love another verse in this chapter, Hebrews 12, verse 11, where we read this: "No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way." There's no question we are being disciplined right now and that it's painful. We can't ignore it. But neither should we collapse under the weight of it, because God is training us. Just as gardeners train tender, vulnerable plants to be outside, so God is training us in ways that we might not be able to understand yet, but that training is happening. I love the athletic verb there that's translated trained. It's the Greek verb gymnazo. It's where we get our word gym from, and gymnastics. People who go to gyms can't do that. It's one of the many restrictions that we're facing right now. But you know what happens in a gym? You work out. It's very strenuous. It can be painful. It's difficult. It's inconvenient. And yet it's all done for a reason. There's a goal, a good purpose. And just so, God is training us. It's as if this pandemic is an opportunity for us to be in God's gym. Sometimes people who go to gyms have trainers who are there to help them. They give them exercises and focus on specific muscle groups that need some attention. God is the supreme gym trainer. We're under His care. He knows what we need to have things shored up and strengthened in our lives. He knows what areas of our lives need to be hardened. He's not doing this to punish us. He's doing it to correct us, to strengthen us, to harden us, to make us more faithful followers of Jesus Christ. And so, how do you see God working on you, even in this time, with all of its inconvenience and struggle? Can you see things developing in your life that are a direct result of all of the hardships that we're experiencing right now? Maybe it's too soon to tell. But you know, there are so many good things that we see even in this time. People being kind to each other, who are respecting all of the restrictions that are put upon us, who understand that, as difficult as it is, who are checking in on others, buying groceries and filling prescriptions for people who can't get out. There is a sense of kindness and patience and love that is emerging now that might not have otherwise happened were it not for this situation that we are in. It's still so hard to deal with what we're dealing with, but God is training us. He's strengthening us. One of the good things that comes out of this time of quarantine or isolation is that people are enjoying new hobbies. People are picking up maybe things that they used to do that they let go for whatever reason, or they're finding some new things that are a source of encouragement and are life-giving. I've recently renewed interest in some furniture refinishing. It's something I used to do more often, and I've begun to do it a little bit in recent weeks. I don't know if it's because of all of the hand washing or sanitizer or sanding of furniture that has contributed to this, but my hands are rough. They're cracked. They hurt. It's a sign of the pain that we're all experiencing right now. But you know, something beautiful has come out of it. Something good, something new. And there's a lot of far better things that are going to come out of this, far better than a refinished piece of furniture or anything else that we might find as a hobby or something of interest. God is working on us. He's training us, hardening us. And there will be a harvest. We can trust that the God who is working in all of this will complete that work. And in the meantime, we can know that because He's our Father and we are His children, the very best thing that could come out of this, the best thing of all, is a renewed and strengthened relationship with God our Father through Jesus Christ. So don't forget that word of encouragement and the hope and promise of the gospel. God is your Father. He is with you. He understands. He cares. He loves. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it's been encouraging for you, and I look forward to meeting you again in this format in the near future. In the meantime, be well and be blessed.